Dean Sharp and Linda from Claremore. They love America, they love God, and Dean is an author. He's been a pastor, a businessman. He's now residing in Rogers County. He's the chairperson for city elders for Rogers County, but God has a much larger platform for him. And so the two books that he's written that will be available to you at the end of the program today, What Happened to My Country, I may not have the exact words, and How Do I Get My Country Back, or A Christian Perspective of American History. And so I want you to put your hands together and welcome Dean Sharp as he comes to share this morning.
As a pastor, I want to come to you as a pastor, an author, a businessman today and talk to you about America and the church. I remember being here before, and I talked about America and history. History is one of the things that we can use to learn so much about where we need to be as people of God. I'm reminded of the story. We get tired of hearing the same message over and over again, it seems like, but I remember the story about a young pastor who was called to a new church, and he drove with his U-Haul trailer and wound up at a new location, a different state, on Saturday night, and he got up and preached on Sunday morning, tired, preached on baptism, and the people were excited. But the next week he was unloading furniture, and he came in and he preached the same message again on baptism, and the people thought, well, you know, he's tired, he hasn't had time to study yet, but he'll get with the program. And the next week he preached on the same message again on baptism. And the people were getting a little concerned about that. And the fourth Sunday, he preached on the same message again on baptism. And one of the chairmen of the committee stood up and said, we're going to have a meeting right after church. We'd like our pastor to join us behind closed doors. And they said, you've got to have a better message than this or a different one. And why do you keep preaching on baptism? And he said, well, I get so excited about a subject and I just can't quit talking about it. And I want to drill it home. And they said, well, you've already drilled it home, so let's go on to something else. So the next Sunday, people were really excited. The place was packed. Minister got up and he preached on baptism again. And they asked him to come in and meet again. And they said, look, we need you to move on, and we're going to give you a text out of the Bible to preach on, Matthew 3:10. And we want you to study all week. The rumors were flying through the community, and it was standing room only, and people outside the building waiting to hear what the new young minister was going to preach on. And the text, of course, reads, and they laid the axe to the foot of the tree. And he got up and he scratched his head and he said, you know, I've read commentaries all week on this subject. I've tried to research and find out what the greatest minds, theological minds of all time have thought. And the only conclusion I could come to is they were cutting a trail to the river to baptize somebody. So today we're going to talk about amnesia a little bit and what Americans' problems are. 7 years ago, in my first book, I penned the phrase that America has fallen into a sleep and is suffering from amnesia. I'm glad to see Jonathan Cahn has recently recorded and written about this himself, about the problems that we have. And my contention is that not only as America as a nation do they have amnesia, so does the church. The church has lost its voice in the community, and it needs to regain that. I'm concerned about our nation. We have to move now in order to reestablish our nation and our church on the underpinnings of what our forefathers gave us. Absolutely. We have to move now. And I'm thankful for city elders and what they're doing, what we're doing now, as I say, because we're establishing the same group, the same call, the same ministry in Rogers County. We've already formed brigades to go to the school board and the different things to reattach the promise of Scripture to the government offices and the schools and everything else to bring Jesus Christ back into that area. We've got to move to make that happen. So what I want us to do today is start looking at America maybe through a little bit different lens, like that of our past. Just like a mosaic, you will discover that every event that has happened in the past helps to build the picture and the scene of who we are, what we've become, and what we've lost. the scenes of evil and unchallenged events, and I can tell you, and I'm going to go through some of them today, and if time permits, we're going to talk about the solutions, because I've built that into the presentation today. But anyway, we have been uncoupled from our underpinnings by activities and things that have happened in the past. And the tragedy of lost memory of America, it's a tragedy, I think, that's largely been caused by a lack of good teaching and good preaching within the congregations around America. Now, we have had heroes who have stepped into the pulpits, who have mounted the pulpits in the past. Jonathan Edwards, who was arguably the guy who started the first great American awakening, and who talked about and preached one of those great sermons entitled Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. We have a tragedy, though, but because so many people, so many men and women who mount the pulpits have failed and are afraid to teach the whole counsel of God, and I believe that has to stop. We need to have leaders who are focused on our goal. The problem within our congregations is so many leaders, so many church leaders, so many government leaders have been focused on incidentals and building their own careers rather than on the goal for the American people and for the members of a congregation. That has to change. Too bad that the pastors many times have accepted the message that the Democrats and the liberals preach about separation of church and state and the fear of losing a 5013C. They ought to lose it and get into the business of what God's called them into to begin with. Many have been intimidated by the threat of persecution, by people saying, we're going to come after you unless you do this or that. COVID-19, as I call it, the Fauci-Obama Wuhan virus, was absolutely proof positive that they were running a test to see if they could force churches basically to go out of business. And we can't tolerate that, nor will we do that. And we need to have leaders that will stand up like John MacArthur did and say in California, we're not going to quit. Many in congregations, and this is one key point that I want to make, many in congregations today aren't even disciples of Jesus Christ. They've heard about him, but they've never met him. And that's what preaching and teaching should do, is bring people to the foot of the cross to come face to face with Jesus Christ and understand what it is to follow him. And to follow him daily and mentor other people and lead to decisions being made. We have a culture that has crept into the body of Christ over the years, and it's uncoupled many of the leaders in the churches, in the congregations. It has uncoupled them from a biblical worldview. We have to start at home first. Remember what 2 Chronicles 7:14 says. If my people, I'm going to stop right there. Because it starts at home, folks. We've got to clean up our own homes. We've got to clean up our own congregations. We've got to get rid of the filth and the smut. And we've got to start worshiping God and putting prayer back into our lives and letting Jesus Christ reign there. And then we can start to go out and help change the neighborhood and the world. We've got to keep the culture out of the body of Christ. We have lost, in many cases, our reliance on God. And unfortunately, in some cases, we've totally forgotten about God altogether. And that is so sad. I want to take you back just for a moment in time to remember a time in 50, 60, 70 years ago when school teachers used to lead children in classrooms in prayer, in Bible study, and taught them what it was to follow Jesus Christ. During the same time period, you would find great movies coming out like The Greatest Story Ever Told or The King of Kings. These were the rock stars of the day as they continued to work and to teach in school what we needed to have taught about Jesus. But unfortunately, what's happened is the American church and America as a whole is walking down the same trail that Israel walked down. When they began to disallow God and they allowed other gods, when God told them to go into the land and kill everything that was there, they didn't listen to him. And they began to take on the evil gods that were there. And it wasn't long until they were following this character named Baal, or Baal, as we pronounce it. And the first thing that the prophets of Baal said is, you've got to get rid of the name of Jehovah God in all the land. My contention is that what's going on in America today, and has been for the last 50 to 70 years, is a worship of Baal. They have allowed that to come back into the culture, and they are getting rid of Jehovah God in every place that they can. We have to stop that, folks. So today I want to go through some of what we have forgotten, how the villains have facilitated that loss, and I want you to see their long-range plan, and I'm going to offer you some solutions if I can. I want you to see some of the key points that's led to the decline that we've had here. You know, it was between 1780 and 1860 that liberal theology began to creep into the churches through what was called the Enlightenment period. Anytime the world comes up with a clever title for some period and talk about it being good, I get very suspicious. And the Enlightenment period was one of those that it wasn't very enlightening at all. There were those who, by 1877, the Socialist Labor Party was founded in America, because they didn't like the way things were going. In 1881, Nietzsche, Marx, and Freud all got up and declared in unison, God is dead. Well, we can be thankful that all three of those are dead, and now God is back alive. In 1890 to 1920s, which was the progressive era, as it was called, the social gospel came into likability among the people, and they began to follow that, and denominations and pastors lost their focus on God and prayer. It was amazing to watch the Marxism that was being accepted not only in America at the time, but also in the congregations. 1901, the Socialist Party of America was founded. Somebody says, why are we seeing all this? I want to show you a trail. And I have a reason for doing that. 1908, the Federal Council of Churches was started. Not the World Council, but the Federal Council here in America. In 1919, the Progressive Educational Association was formed. It was formed for the purpose of to begin dumbing down students, because they were tired of having some excel and some not excel, and so they wanted to have everyone at the same level. And that's exactly what John Dewey taught as he went through life. In 1919, the Communist Party USA was founded. In 1920, Eugene Debs, who was presidential candidate for the Socialist Party, led to what was called the first Red Scare in America. He only got 0.5% of the votes, but people were afraid of the message nonetheless at the time. Thank God they were. 1923, for the first time, a few teachers started officially using Darwinism or evolution in the classroom in public school. 1925, the Butler Act. Tennessee passed a law that was called the Butler Act, in which they outlawed anything but the Bible to be taught as the origin of life, as was found in the Garden of Eden when God created man and woman. Also, the Scopes monkey trial, if you remember that. If some of you are alive, you were there. You may have attended that. I can tell by the gray hair. But that was the Scopes monkey trial. Actually, Bryant won the lawsuit, but it was thrown out of court due to a technicality. And so the liberals always claim that we won, which they didn't. 1933, the Frankfurt School in Germany was placing Marxist curriculum in public schools in every place, especially in America, that was to be used. In 1933, John Dewey, who was an excuse for somebody who was educated, began writing the Humanist Manifesto. He should never have been in American education at all. 1962, prayer in the Bible was taken out the next year out of school. It took them 4 years to get all that machinery in place, and I was able to graduate before all that happened. 1973, Roe versus Wade. On and on the list goes. 2009, crosses began to be taken down across America and attacks being made. 2020 and following, statues were taken down. We started hearing about men using women's bathrooms back in the teens when Obama was in there. You can see a trail here. The reason I show you this, I don't hear any sermons about this. I don't hear anyone talking about how we've gotten off track in the ministry of our church and how we need to get back on track and start leading people back to Jesus Christ and the truth that's found in the Bible. You see, history doesn't often give the satisfaction of a sudden and lasting turning point. History tends to unfold in messy cycles. First comes actions, then reactions, evolutions, and counter-evolutions. And even semi-permanent changes are subtle and global and glacial. I would say that's true except for the last 2 or 3 years. Things have been changing so fast every day. What used to take 20, 25, 30 years to happen happens overnight now. And we've got to watch that, and the church leaders have to be on top of that to keep our people safe and secure and Bible-focused and Jesus-focused. One of the most critical sacrifices that was made to the Marxists in this country was when the church, when Christian-loving people, Christ-loving people walked away from education and just handed them the keys. That was terrible. I want you to see some of the things that happened. Now, Americans always were opposed to central government-controlled public education. Our founders were totally opposed to that. But in 1820, Boston passed the first law for the public education to be there for people and to make it free. Follow the trail of the money. The National Education Association, the NEA, was actually birthed in 1857 in Philadelphia when 43 teachers got together and decided to put that together. They wanted to have a teachers association that would correct all of the things that basically the Bible says that they didn't like. 1867, President Andrew Johnson signed legislation for what was to be the future launch of national public education that didn't start until the Carter administration. For us to remain sovereign, please get this if you get nothing else today. For us to remain sovereign depends upon us being well educated as a people, to be a moral people, and to be self-governed. And public education today does not support any 3 of those things. None of them. It is opposed to all 3 of those things because it's adopted the Marxist way of following. Some of the major education tipping points. 1904, the General Education Board was formed, and it was outspoken at the time saying they wanted religion kicked out of the school, and they also wanted to dumb down the students. 1919, the Progressive Education Association. John Dewey was named as the president. He shouldn't have been involved. 1922, the Oregon Compulsory Education Act was voted on and passed out there. They said that everyone had to go to public school and no other schools could exist. The Supreme Court turned that over due to the anger of the American people. 1923, evolution was officially taught in selected schools for the first time. I told you about the Scopes Monkey trial and the Butler Act. In 1925, the International Bureau of Education was founded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And its first stated objective was to lower the standards in material taught and remove religion, especially Christianity, from the schoolroom. You have to watch this. The Humanist Manifesto was written in 1933. That was by John Dewey. The Frankfurt School, as I explained, was putting things in class. 1962 and 63, the Bible and prayer were removed on May 4th of 1980. The Federal Department of Education was formed, rolling out of the Health and Education Department and becoming a chair of itself and a cabinet-level position all by its own. In 1980, the same year that Ronald Reagan was elected, Howard Zinn wrote his famous book, A People's History of the United States, which ought to be considered trash and garbage. There's not one footnote in the whole book. And it's all based on Marxist doctrines that he grew up with when he was in the Soviet Union. That's where his parents came from. And it's used throughout the school system today. It's all based on theories and his likes. One of the prominent villains he was, I would say. It's really a fake history. It's biased, and it's used all throughout the school system. His work is full of the Marxist propaganda, exaggeration, and lies, which appeal to a lot of people today because they've been listening for 2 generations now to teachers who have been teaching Marxist doctrine in our high schools and in our colleges. And they have nothing else to stand on except that. When facts and Zen's Marxist theory clash, he always went back to his propaganda. A microcosm of that text is he wrote in his book, certain people discovered, and this is on the founding of America only, certain people that discovered that by creating a nation called the United States, they could take over land, profits, and political power from the favorites of England and create popular support for a new privileged leadership and take over power themselves. Such a fake statement. Other major tipping points. 1986. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but they're available when you look at this. It's going to be online. Police officers in 1988 started becoming prominent in public school. We never heard of that when I went to high school. You know, it's so sad to see this. I remember when I was in college, university, playing basketball, and I think this is a microcosm of kind of where we are today. We were playing a team that was very well qualified, but we could beat them. But in the first half, we just failed to show up. And in the locker room at halftime, we were behind 15 points. And we all sat on this bench, and we were just out of it, almost asleep. And the coach came by. He came by with smelling salts and stuck under each one of our noses. And we all jumped back and started looking at him. And he said this, we have to take a different approach in the second half. And he said, first, we have to wake up. Secondly, we need to remember what got us here. And thirdly, you got to get in the game. And you know, we went out in the second half. History would record for us in university. We scored 50 second half points and held them to 25, and we won the game by 15 points. That's what needs to happen in America, and I predict that it's going to happen as we continue to toe the line and to make things happen for Jesus Christ. That's critical. All of these things have been happening. Sexual orientation and transgendering taught, and kids being operated on without parents' approval. Sexual reassignment surgeries. Attempted placement of a Planned Parenthood clinic in Norwalk, which is a Los Angeles school district. I called my friends when I heard about this, 2 pastors that live in LA where I used to live. I said, what are you guys doing about this? He said, we're showing up. And they went to the school board meeting before the vote took place. And the people were so overwhelmingly loud and angry that the school board said, we're going to have to put this on hold. We can't do anything today. We need to force school boards to make different decisions and to hold everything back that's evil that they're voting on until we can replace them through the votes by putting Christian people on the ballots and getting them into office. So the current state of education is teachers' unions today run this like the mafia. Any teacher who is not with the union or doesn't want to go along with the union, they will get bullied and treated very roughly. The NAA union lobbies with propaganda, and they use the media all the time to preach their gospel, as I would call it, a demented gospel, to get their message out. The NAA pumps millions of dollars into the campaigns of liberal politicians, like they did with Jimmy Carter in '76, the Clinton campaign in '92, and Obama, of course, in 2008. And they stand behind these people not because of the color of their skin, not because they are nice people or evil people. They do it because they know that they'll stand for Marxist doctrines and they'll get a payback when they support them like that. That's how politics works. Violence, sexual assault is up in the schools. Jesse talked about that this morning and how that has to be changed. Enrollment is down nationally in public school. 1 million students have been pulled out by their parents last year. Math and English scores continue to drop through the floor. I know more money is spent on public education every year. California, for example, spends now 51% of their entire budget on education, and everything in the state continues to sink lower and lower. The list goes on ad infinitum, ad nauseum. We could talk about it more. Somebody would say, well, why are we so opposed to the Humanist Manifesto? I mean, we're humans. We need to have a manifesto, not like this. John Dewey led the effort in writing that. He built it on 5 tenets or 5 pillars. Abolish the teaching of religion, especially Christianity, in the classroom. I'm totally opposed to it on that basis. Number 2, teach Darwinism as natural selection as the theory of origins for school kids, and they kick creation out of school. And we have to fight even to get it mentioned now in public schools. Remove all fixed moral codes in society. Boy, isn't it great to hear somebody, especially a family member at Thanksgiving or Christmas, talking to you about how everyone ought to have their own moral code and they ought to make their own decisions about that. It works really great until you have a rapist that moves in next door. And his moral code says it's okay for me to do whatever I want to the females in the neighborhood. My cousin said that, and I said, well, that's what happens when somebody like that moves in. And she said, that's the reason we have laws. And I said, well, too bad that you're so opposed to the laws, because the laws come out of the Bible. That's where they came from. And you don't like the Bible? That's too bad. Why don't you try Venezuela? Or go live in North Korea for a while and see what you like and what you don't like there. The thing that the Humanist Manifesto did further is it established the state as the reason for you to have gifts and talents, and that's where you were to use them. You should worship the state, follow the state. That's what John Dewey taught, and that's what's been accepted in school. And he even went so far as to say we need to have a Marxist dictatorship set up in America and work toward building one world government. What a travesty. I want to show you just a couple other things, then I'm going to get into some real healing for us. Not so much bad news. Many of you don't know who this is. Colonel Mandel House. He was not a colonel, never was in the military, but they call him a colonel because he was an advisor to President Woodrow Wilson. Wilson loved him. Time magazine's cover story was the fact that he had proposed that Wilson go to Jekyll Island with the leadership, using it for the place to found the Federal Reserve and the IRS. Now, he wrote a letter. I've uncovered some of the excerpts of that, and I want to read it to you real quick. Soon, every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people, and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. By such a methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as a chargeback for the fiat paper currency that we've committed. Every American will be forced to register or suffer not being able to work or earn a living. Sounds like communism to me. They will be our chattel. And you thought that slavery had ended. And we will hold the secure interest over them forever by operation of the law merchant, by the scheme of secured transactions. Americans, by unknowingly or unwittingly delivering the bills of lading to us, be rendered bankrupt and insolvent forever to remain economic slaves through taxation, secured by their pledges of signing a 1040 form, by the way. They will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us a profit, and they will be none the wiser, for not one man in a million could ever figure out our plans, and if by accident one or two should figure it out, we will have in our arsenal plausible deniability. This guy had Wilson's ear, and this is a part of history because that's what happened. So when you look at what's going on today, and I'm going to rush through this, and you're going to have to read on your own or come to Claremore and listen to some of this in detail. We have 6 families who are really big time into running the world, and they're gaining more power daily. I want to quickly show you some of this. You'll just have to catch it if you can. Since 1557, control of banking in Europe and much of the rest of the world starting in 1810 was run by the Rothschilds family. Still is. since 1896, they have owned 96% of the railroads in the U.S. Now, this is an important thing to remember for a simple reason. Members of the Rockefeller family come into play. They've owned and still own 90% of all oil production in the U.S. and ships much of that by railroads. Guess why? Well, the reason why is it's all started out with their credit facility, which was the Rothschilds Bank in Cleveland. Now, you think I'm talking off the top of my head. This is all footnoted in history. Members of the DuPont family. Most of you are familiar with that name. Since 1830, they have held the government contract for producing gunpowder for all of our military. And they're leaders in the worldwide drug trade. Some of that's illegal, by the way. Members of the Onassis family. Most of you remember Jackie, that married John F. Kennedy. Since 1928, and the Archenary agreement that was made in the castle in Europe, Onassis became the shipping, not hipping, but shipping magnet. And I did this late at night, by the way. Magnet in global oil transport. His was the only Italian oil tankers in operations during the war years because everyone else has got blown up, and his were protected. I wonder why. Because he was in the family. Members of the Warburg family. Banking magnate outside the U.S. These families, all of them have combined. They're meeting this week in Switzerland, by the way. And they're talking about what they want to do with the rest of us who are chattel. They have become controlling interests in business, politics, policy making, and operations of the World Economic Forum. Here's a microcosm, as I call it, of what the stated purpose is of these global elites. And this was uttered by none less than James P. Warburg, who testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in 1950. We shall have a one world government, whether or not we like it. The question is whether the world government will be achieved by consent or by conquest. I tell you, folks, they're on a mission. And we have to be on a mission. Because God is more powerful than all of them and all of their money. I feel like many times, I was a Greek student in seminary. I feel like many times when I got to Acts chapter 8 and reading about Paul's statement to Simon the sorcerer who wanted to buy the power from Peter. The Greek text, most of the English translations, he's off a little bit in the actual translation of that. But in Greek, he says, to hell with you and your money. And that's what we ought to tell these families. We need to tell them that Jesus Christ is Lord, and we're going to do this. All right, let's get into some facts now, real quickly. Jesse wants solutions. We're going to get into that. America was founded as a Christian nation. That's absolutely true. I wrote about that, and so kids would have an answer to the Marxist doctrine and crap that they receive in school. All the early colonial and state constitutions testify to that by what they made each candidate go through. Villains in this land and elsewhere in the world don't like the way America was founded. That's what they oppose. They want a communist system here, just like in the rest of the world. God's kingdom is constantly being attacked since its founding at the cross. And through that great sacrifice, we've been freed. Now, folks, the book of Revelation tells me that we win. And we're going to win. And we're on the winning side, and we need to depend upon God. But we need to change some future facts of what will be later called history as we establish a footprint in this country and start making things happen for the cross. America and God's kingdom has been attacked in every generation, and attacks are more prominent all the time, growing exponentially. Attacks from the last 160 years have focused on the family unit, the Christian faith, and our Constitution. The church has lost its voice because it would not teach anything dealing with this. And we need to be a people of the book and a people of our culture and have pastors that will teach and preach the message of Christ to the culture and teach them the decisions that they need to be making. Here's the challenges that we have. Pastors who fear dealing with the culture. I know pastors that are scared to death to talk about politics. Christianity is politics. Jesus dealt with the political people of his day. Threw them out of the temple. And he dealt with it. And we need to be facing the Marxist revolution we face in America today. And if pastors won't stand up, then the congregations need to send them back to school to learn what they need to be preaching about, not just out of text out of the Bible, but how to apply it in our culture today. That's critical. Very little response from the church, and it's a Christianity being outlawed everywhere except in the local church building. I tell people I met the other day, we're having a national conference in May, and I'm addressing pastors down in southeastern Oklahoma in March. And I'm going to tell them, you need to come out of your buildings, and you need to quit about stop talking about the denominations you belong to, and start joining hands together and fighting the culture that's here and standing on the Bible together rather than in your own silo as a little individual congregation. We've got to do that. We've got to do that. And City Elders is providing the absolute platform for all of that to happen. I find very little response to the Darwinism and the evolution that's being taught in school. Now, I know that City Elders fights for that, but you get outside this room, I got to tell you, the world doesn't care what we're talking about in this room today. We got to do this outside, and we got to continue that. The fixed moral codes being removed from society, and sadly, today, they're even being removed from the church. As congregations stand up, I remember Chris talking about the United Methodist Church, that that's his statement, not mine. But I remember years ago when they embraced as a denomination Marxism, and they took that on as what they believed that the country ought to have. There's other denominations that have done the same thing. What's happened is the state has been established as being the reason for which individuals should live their lives, express their purpose, and use all their talents to support the state. I argue with that, and I say that's baloney. We need to use our talents for Jesus Christ and leading people into victory and to eternity as they go to heaven in our home, because this isn't home. No response from the church in establishing all of this done. All of these things that I've talked about, for the most part, the church has never addressed. Now, here's our path. The keys to restoring and reformation. Go back to the principles of our founding. Put God in the center of our lives in prayer, worship, and study. All three of those. It needs to be a three-legged stool that every one of us sits on or stands on every day with our kids, our families, our wives, our husbands, and we need to do that every day. That ought to be the goal that we have. We need to develop a biblical worldview. If you don't know what that means, talk to Jesse, me, or one of the pastors here, hopefully, who has a biblical worldview. And start realizing that we're going to change history because we do have a biblical worldview. Learn our history of a nation and the church. That's why I wrote my thesis. They point to a roadmap for solutions. And by the way, the Bible is a great book of history. Fourthly, you need to know your enemy in all of these tactics. Establish city elders in every county based on the three pillars of church, business, and government. Form brigades, which we've already done in Rogers County before we even form city elders. We're going to have brigades, and we do have them going to the school board, the mayor's office, and we're watching these people, and we've communicated to them, the city manager and everyone else. The sheriff is now going to be a part of city elders in our county. The biggest law enforcement dog in our county. And he called me from Las Vegas yesterday. He was at the SHOT Show. And he said, all I got to say, Dean, is amen to everything that you're doing because I'm with you. Yeah, we need to change history going forward because the church has been so quiet in the past. And we need to activate one campaign, one office, one congregation at a time. Reform. Notice the word reform? It's a verb. Reform our pulpits, culture, and government to the position of biblical standards and God's power over all things. We've got to bring reformation. And if it's not going to start in a pulpit, then we're going to start a city elders group and we're going to help reform the church that the guy's preaching at right now. Projects and goals for the ecclesia or city elders as we restore our collective memory. As the ecclesia, we must together, and I'm talking about getting out of your buildings. Forget about the name that you have for a little while. whether you're Baptist or Presbyterian or Assembly of God or Pentecostal or Methodist or any one of the 180 other names that you can be using. Forget about that. Join hands and start working to bring back the kingdom. Remember the prayer that Jesus told us to pray? May your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. We want that here because we know that righteousness will reign then. And we have to protect all the unborn in the family units that are currently under attack. Empower parents in our circle of influence to make righteous education decisions for their kids. Get involved in the election process like a detective would, and ensure that fair elections will be held and not stolen by anyone. I'm all for taking somebody out that delivers ballots after midnight in the trunk of a car and they're all printed up. Help pull some sister organizations to the battle. I'm excited to see city elders joining in with frontline doctors and other groups like that are fighting for the freedom in our land. We need to be doing that. Activate, help mentor pastors that are fearful and take them to a fearless stand for God in America. Working hard, shoulder to shoulder with other people and other pastors in places outside of their buildings. I know I was a pastor, held a church, and I always would take my people to other congregations. But they wouldn't come to ours because they always had to meet in their own building. And I know why. Because they're afraid. They're afraid if their people see something else going on, they're going to be attracted to that. And it's not so much the people leaving, it's the money that leaves. That's what they're afraid of. We've got to stand firm in this time of testing. I'm about done, Jesse. Our foundation has to be the Word of God. That's what we stand on. We need to know it. We need to grow in it. We need to learn it. We need to study it. It needs to be our view. The Bible and its stand on the world and where it's going should be our view. And if we don't know what that is, we need to learn it quick. Trust in the Lord. That means prayer, worship, and obedience. All three, doing all that all the time. It's time, it's like this, like we're in now, a time of testing, that God's people are to arise. I want you to say this with me in times like this. That's what we were created for. God has placed us here for a purpose. We need to discern the times and the seasons. The only way of doing this is being in His Word. We have been and are in a season of testing. Ecclesiastes 3 tells us that. Oh my gosh, there's a time for everything under heaven. And that's so true. There is a time of testing even. That's the American Standard Version. God, who is outside of time, works in time. Galatians 4:4 tells us that, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, in His time. Not in ours, but in His. I would have loved in some ways to have been a disciple of Jesus and been there on the ground, but one of the questions I would have had is, why 400 years of silence, God? Why 400 years of nothing being said? Look back to the leaders. We have to discern the times and seasons that we're in. God has prepared us for what? Such a time as this. Testing is a time of preparation. James 1:2 says, consider it all joy, brothers and sisters, when you come across and encounter various trials. We need to have conviction, endurance, and solidification. We have to be there because God has prepared us what? For such a time as this. It's time for us to stand. It's time for us to get going. 1 Peter 1:6 says, this should bring great joy to you, although you may have to suffer for a short time in various trials. We need to have growth in all of this. We need to have conviction for such a time as this. I love the idea of fruit being produced. I like it to be solid state. I like that term. Hebrews 1:2 says, this brings great joy, although you may have to suffer for a short time in various trials. We need to have that growth, that conviction, that endurance for such a time as this. God does not work in our schedule. I'm going to tell you this real quick. Genesis 15 has a very interesting message here. Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. I tell you, I would have been one of those people wandering in the wilderness saying, God, why didn't you tell us this before? all of these people. God worked with Moses and Joseph and David out of time, out of their own schedules. And he did so. And it's time for us to start adopting the schedule of God and to discern his times. We're in a time of testing, and it's a time for the people of God to start standing up and saying, we will elevate Jesus Christ. We will make him king forever in this world, and we are going to follow him every minute of our lives. God bless you, folks. God bless you. Thank you.
Amen.